Outer Wilds and Dark Souls are both games that have strong narrative and mechanical themes, ones that weirdly seem to intersect. They are all about the cyclical nature of things, loops that seem infallible yet never take away from you the strong desire to try to break them, tough gauntlets meant to be repeated over and over until you become desperately intimate with their topography. Their experience is built around getting your ass kicked by something or someone, and they deliberately obfuscate their storytelling to the degree that finding out what the fuck is going on in the first place is the game. They are odysseys with a lost horizon, a shape-shifting Ouroboros of infinite mortality. Beyond that, you could argue that the similarities drop off almost instantly. One's based on exploration, the other on mangling the undead with a big sword, and admittedly there was a touch of clickbait about this video when it first started gestating in my brain. However, I think there is more to explore here about how both games approach tackling the challenge of representing breaking the cycle in an interactive experience, and in particular how Outer Wilds succeeds in halting the entropy that inevitably comes from that challenge. Part of Dark Souls' success lies in how it encourages you to keep playing even in defeat. The world is big and dangerous, and sometimes just getting from one side of a room to the other is a mighty endeavour. Unlocking shortcuts and finding new equipment to help you survive the next onslaught, as well as the agony of losing your hard-earned souls if you don't wade back in to reclaim them, has this great synergy that keeps you motivated to push ever onwards. And you need that motivation because you'll most likely end up repeating big chunks of the journey ad nauseum. This is the experience of all undead, a vicious cycle that leaves you ever hollow until you eventually break through the miasma and reach the next bonfire, the next small pocket of respite before you carry on. The interconnectivity of the world aids this sensation further, giving you many moments of, oh wow, it's this place, as you circle back in on the game's initial hub, the Firelink Shrine, on these great tendrils that can even be seen from afar. The scope of this game is relatively unknown the first time you set foot into the Firelink Shrine, and even though much of the world is hidden from you, there's this great sense that there is a lot to explore here. And before you do anything else, you find yourself faced with the daunting task of choosing one of the many paths ahead of you. Do you brave the skeletons in the impenetrable darkness of the catacombs, or the spectral entities of New Nomai Ruins? Or do you venture higher, into the undead burg to face off against knights, dragons, and corrupted clergymen? You do the latter first. Until you really know that world inside out, the undead burg will most likely be your first port of call. It's quite literally the path of least resistance. One of the problems that Dark Souls has from a mechanical perspective is that it offers you a choice so early on that doesn't really end up being a choice. Because out of these three initial paths, two of them feature encounters with foes you basically can't defeat. Not because they are a higher level than you, but because you don't have access to the right equipment or the knowledge of what you need to do in order to take them down. I'm sure a veteran player will correct me here, as these paths are technically possible to traverse. Since very few enemies act as mechanical roadblocks, there is nothing stopping you just running past everything if you have an idea about where to run to. But for a first-time player, this plants a weirdly antithetical seed in your head. It sends the message, there is a correct path to take. Explore at your peril. And although that first choice at the Firelink Shrine isn't replicated in the same way anywhere else, eventually all paths will be open to you, it leaves an impression that I don't think particularly does the game any favours. For some, it may even dissuade them from exploring alternative paths, and exploration is the greatest joy of that game. Probably stronger than that, actually. It's an essential component of its storytelling. Now, Outer Wilds opens in a similar vein. After an initial tutorial area you need to run in order to get the launch codes for your ship, you are sent out into the great unknown with little to go on bar explore. You shoot out into space, find a planet that looks inviting, and quickly you learn some interesting lessons. 1. The universe is a cruel and merciless place that you really need to learn more about in order to navigate safely. 2. If you meet an unfortunate fate, You wake up at the beginning of the game, next to a campfire on Timber Hearth as though nothing had happened. 3. Should you ensure your continued survival, after a period of time has passed, the sun explodes, wiping out the entire solar system, and you wake up by that campfire on Timber Hearth as though nothing had happened. The first time you find yourself at the beginning of the game again, you will notice that one thing has changed. You don't need to go looking for the launch codes for your ship, because you already know them. A cursory glance on your ship's computer will find any information you discovered about the solar system from the last loop, which, to my mind, is a visual representation of the player character's memory and not an actual computer, and this information can be used to plan out the next leg of your explorative journey. And so you venture forth, and maybe you look at a different planet this time. You're more wise to how your ship controls and how you can use your own momentum to overcome hazards, and maybe this time a new hazard gets the better of you. What the hell is ghost matter anyway? You die, or you time out the end of the universe, and you're back to square one again, with seemingly little to show for your efforts. Except, actually, that's not true. One of the disheartening things about Dark Souls is that sometimes long periods go between bonfires and even unlocking shortcuts. You feel like you're making amazing progress and then you're killed and have to redo an arduous gauntlet. Any weapons, armor and item you find are retained, and you can easily reclaim any souls lost since the last loop, but often the goal isn't self-fulfillment, but simply getting to the next bonfire. Building for yourself a new checkpoint and a base of operations for the next excursion, and sometimes you can get stuck on a particular section for quite some time. What eventually got me to stop playing Dark Souls back in 2011 was the encounter with the Belfry Gargoyles, or rather the path leading up to this encounter. I found myself hitting a wall, getting frustrated, and in that frustration making stupid mistakes, and although at that point a little exploring uncovered new areas I could investigate, I knew already that the gargoyles were a mandatory obstacle to progress. Over the years I've gone back a few times to see if perhaps I had the constitution to keep going, but alas, it has not been a fruitful reunion thus far. My relationship with Outer Wilds has been stop and start too, largely because as an exploratory experience it scares the absolute shit out of me, and certainly there are things about the game that are a little... well, let's just say I had to consult a guide in order to make sense of some of the game rules. But I won't blame the game for that, rather my own inability to connect the dots. What really impressed me was that every single aspect of the game was doable from the first moment your ship launches from Timber Hearth. Whether that's the shifting sands of the Hourglass Twins, or the fragile, treacherous underground city of Brittle Hollow, the non-Euclidean endosphere of the Dark Bramble, or even the absolute nightmare fuel that is Giant's Deep, everything is built upon the same set of rules. You can go anywhere, so long as you know how to get there. In a tabula rasa playthrough, knowledge is the equipment upgrades that other games offer as tangible milestones to progress, with each cycle offering up opportunities to learn more about the solar system, and push ever forwards towards your own personal eureka moment. Even the most prolific astronauts among us will need to visit each location in the solar system multiple times to put together the pieces of the puzzle, with one location revealing how to access another, hopping from planet to put together a lexicon that will propel you towards the truth, or at least a truth that is enough to seek an end to this temporal centrifuge imprisoning you, allowing you to work out what you need to do to break the cycle once and for all. The 22-minute time limit feeds into this in this weird paradoxical way. You'll never be able to do everything in one run, except, of course, you have to. Even fully exploring a single planet requires multiple attempts. But crucially, you already have every piece of equipment you need to do what needs to be done, except the knowledge of how to use it. The joy of the game comes from discovering how all these innocuous elements fit together, how even things like momentum and the passage of time can be equipped like a tool to help you make sense of this bizarre, terrifying universe. More so than this is how the game folds its storytelling into exploration as a fundamental part of the puzzle you cannot solve without it. The fable of the Nomai, the time loop, and the search for the Eye of the Universe are crucial steps along the path to the truth. truth, not simply asides for inquisitive fans. If there's one major downside to Outer Wilds, is that for all the freedom of exploration it offers, in the end it's ultimately bound by its own rules and logic. To finish the game requires a wholly linear sequence of events, which, if you're a clumsy dyspraxic oaf like myself, you might find yourself attempting multiple times. And it's not the most exciting sequence of events at that. There's a lot of waiting around for things to happen, and navigating treacherous areas at excruciatingly slow speeds, and it has clearly been designed this way so that you perform the final task just as the sun starts to explode, but it's not exactly a high-octane thrill ride along the way. As much as I am critical of this flawed denouement to an otherwise incredible game, I don't really know how else they could have done it. I guess it's fairly apt that a game about breaking a loop would end with a fixed sequence of events, and like Dark Souls' final brutal encounter at the kiln of the first flame, the thing about an infinite cycle is that some things are just inevitable and mundane. Because for all the excitement and mystery of the world shrouded in secrecy, the truth will always out, and someone will have to pull the bloody plug. Where I think Outer Wilds does the Dark Souls thing better is that it values rewarding exploration over patience. It wants you to seek out a path to the truth in an order of your choosing. Both games cast you as an actor in a play that is all but finished, tasking you with slotting the final piece of the jigsaw and ending something that has existed in limbo for an unthinkable amount of time. I just think Outer Wilds is more successful at executing this idea. I think in some regards still the Dark Souls comparison is probably a stretch, and that Outer Wilds is closer to a Metroidvania in terms of pure design, or even just its own thing. But the reason it came to my mind was those opening hours in Firelink Shrine, which promised an adventure no matter what direction you went in, yet ended up pulling the rug from under your feet. I know this is a sentiment that not everyone is going to agree with me on, but what I hope people will take away from this video is that there are more interesting ways to gate progress, that non-linearity, especially in storytelling based around suggestion and interpretation, only helps to make the experience better. And above all else, that you all need to play Outer Wilds, because it really is a work of art.